last photo, it wasn't looking at the camera. It was looking at my cabin. I'm a wildlife researcher. I've spent the last 6 seasons doing population surveys for a state fish and wildlife agency, mostly elk and mountain goat counts, using remote trail cameras set up across a network of drainages in a range I'm not going to name specifically, for reasons that will make sense by the end of this. It's quiet work, solitary by design. 6 to 8 weeks at a stretch living in a research cabin with no neighbors for 11 miles in any direction, checking camera cards, logging data, sending reports back to the office over a satellite connection that drops half the time. I tell people it's the best job I've ever had. Most seasons, that's true. Last fall, I had 12 cameras out across a high pass I'll call Site 7 in my notes, spaced along known game trails. Standard setup I've used for years. I'd check them every 10 to 14 days, swap memory cards, review the footage back at the cabin in the evenings. Thousands of frames a week, almost all of it elk, the occasional black bear, birds triggering the sensor and wasting a frame. Routine. About 4 weeks into the season, I found the first one. It was a single frame, time-stamped at 3:47 a.m., from a camera on the north side of the pass. Most of the frame was the usual, dark timber, a sliver of the game trail lit up by the infrared flash. In the far corner, barely inside the sensor's field of view, there was a shape. Upright, roughly human proportioned, standing at the very edge of the frame like it had almost, but not quite, stepped out of the camera's range in time. I didn't think much of it initially. Hunters use that pass sometimes, legally and otherwise, and a person standing in the woods at 3:47 a.m. isn't itself evidence of anything except bad judgment. I logged it as a human intrusion, noted it for my report, and moved on to the next 1,000 frames. Then I found it again. Same camera, 5 nights later, same time window, within 20 minutes of the first sighting. Same shape, same edge of frame. Except closer. I want to be precise about what closer means, because I've gone back through every one of these frames more times than I can count trying to convince myself I was wrong. In the first photo, the shape occupied roughly the outer 6 inches of the frame, mostly obscured by a tree trunk. In the second, 5 nights later, it had moved perhaps 4 feet nearer to the camera, still at the same edge, still mostly in shadow, but unmistakably the same proportions, the same stillness. I checked the other 11 cameras across the pass. Nothing. No sign of a person, no other appearances, nothing unusual at all except this one camera catching this one shape at roughly the same hour every 5 to 7 nights, moving a little closer to the lens each time. I told myself it was a hunter scouting the area, memorizing my camera's position, deliberately timing his movements to avoid tripping other sensors on the pass. It's not an impossible theory. People do strange things in the backcountry, and I've caught poachers on camera before who were far more careful about avoiding detection than this. If you've ever reviewed the same footage a dozen times looking for the explanation that makes it not scary, and never found one, you already know exactly where this story is going. By the 6th appearance, 6 weeks into the season, the shape had crossed more than half the distance to the camera. I could make out more detail now, though detail isn't quite the right word for what I was seeing, because the closer it got, the less it looked like a hunter, and the less it looked like anything I had a category for. It wore no visible gear, no pack, no rifle, no reflective clothing, nothing a person moving through that terrain at night would reasonably have on them. Its proportions were close to human, but not exactly. The limbs a little too long relative to the torso, the stance slightly off, weight distributed in a way that made it look less like it was standing and more like it was pausing mid-stride, every single time, as though the camera's flash was catching it between one motion and the next rather than at rest. I stopped sleeping well after that appearance. I want to be honest about that. I've spent enough seasons alone in remote cabins that isolation itself doesn't bother me. This was different. This felt like being watched by something that knew exactly how a trail camera worked and was using that knowledge deliberately, patiently, the way you'd approach an animal you didn't want to spook. The seventh appearance was the one that made me consider ending the season early. It was no longer at the edge of the frame. It stood almost dead center, close enough now that the infrared flash caught it in full, and for the first time, it wasn't facing the camera at all. It had its back to the lens. It was facing away, down the game trail, in the exact direction, and I confirmed this later on a topo map, more than once, because I needed to be wrong about it, of my cabin. 11 miles by trail. Less than half that, in a straight line, over the pass. It had walked toward my camera for 6 weeks. In the final photo, it wasn't looking at the lens at all. It was looking at where I slept. I pulled all 12 cameras from Site 7 the next morning. I told my supervisor over the satellite line that I'd had equipment issues, which was technically true if you stretched the definition generously enough. I didn't mention the photos. I've reviewed enough odd trail cam footage over the years. Bears standing oddly, elk caught mid-blink looking almost human for one unfortunate frame, that I know how easy it is to convince a room full of colleagues that you saw a shadow and a story, nothing more. But I kept the memory card. I still have it. 7 photographs, chronological, each one a little closer, the last one facing away from the lens toward a cabin that, as far as I know, only 3 people on Earth knew the exact location of that season. Me, my supervisor, and whoever built the place a decade before I was ever assigned to it. I finished out the season in a different research cabin 40 miles south, one shared with 2 other field techs, and I made sure every future assignment I took had at least one other person on site. I've told myself that's just standard practice, safer for solo field work, nothing more than professional caution. But every camera I've deployed since then, I check the corners of every frame before I look at anything else. Every single one. Elk count, weather data, none of it matters until I've confirmed there's nothing standing at the edge of the shot that shouldn't be there. So far, there hasn't been. I don't know if that means whatever was at Site 7 stayed at Site 7, or if it just hasn't found the next camera yet. If any of you have ever reviewed trail cam or security footage and found something that got closer every single time, in a place it had no business being, I need to know, because I've been carrying this alone for a full year, and I don't think I'm supposed to be the only one who's seen this. 4 of us went up. 3 of us remember climbing. I need to say up front that I'm not the kind of person who posts things like this. I'm 29, I install HVAC systems for a living. And until last October, the strangest thing that had ever happened to me was finding a raccoon in my attic. I'm telling you that so you understand I have no reason to make any of this up, and no way to explain it either. 4 of us, me, my younger brother Danny, and our friends Marcus and Priya, did a 3-day backpacking trip in a national forest in the Rockies, a route we'd done a version of twice before. Nothing extreme. Established trail, established campsite. The kind of trip where the biggest risk is somebody forgetting the water filter. On day 2, Marcus pulled up the topo map on his phone and pointed at a ridge to our east. Said if we cut over it instead of following the switchbacks, we'd save 2, maybe 2.5 miles, and still make camp with plenty of daylight. The GPS showed it as a gentle rise. Nothing steep, nothing technical, just a shortcut. We took it. I want to be precise about the time, because the time is the whole reason I'm writing this. We left the main trail at 1:52 p.m. I checked my watch because Danny had made a joke about how I check it too much, and I'd said something like, someone has to be the responsible one, and we'd all laughed. That's the last normal thing I remember about that afternoon. The climb itself felt easy. Grassy, open, a little wind. We talked the whole way up. Priya was telling a story about a wedding she'd been to, something about a groom who forgot the rings, and I remember laughing hard enough that I had to stop walking for a second. It felt like maybe 20 minutes, 25 at most, before we crested the ridge and started down the other side toward camp. When we walked into our campsite, the light was gone. Not dimming, gone. Full dark, the kind where you need a headlamp to find your own tent. Priya checked her phone out of habit, more to check for a signal than anything else, and went quiet. It was 6:14 p.m. We'd left the trail at 1:52. A 20-minute climb, by every one of our watches and every one of our memories, had taken over 4 hours. Nobody could account for it. We hadn't stopped to eat, hadn't stopped to rest. I would have remembered that. We all would have. And yet somehow 4 hours had folded themselves into a walk none of us experienced as anything but short. Marcus laughed it off first, the way people do when they need the moment to be smaller than it is. Said his phone clock must have glitched, said maybe we walked slower than we thought. Standard stuff. Danny didn't laugh. Danny was quiet in a way that wasn't like him, sitting on a rock at the edge of camp, staring back up at the ridge we'd just come down. I asked him if he was okay, and he said, "I don't remember the top." If you've ever looked at your watch and felt the ground shift slightly under the number, you already know exactly the feeling I'm describing. We pressed him on it, gently at first. Danny is not a dramatic person. He's the kind of guy who reads the instruction manual before assembling furniture. When we asked what he meant by not remembering the top, he said it like he was trying to solve a math problem out loud. He remembered leaving the trail. He remembered the first part of the climb, the grass, the wind. And then his memory picked back up on the descent, on the other side of the ridge, walking down toward camp, mid-sentence in a conversation none of the rest of us remembered having. He couldn't tell us what was said in that conversation. He couldn't tell us who he'd been talking to. He said it felt, in his words, like skipping a chapter and picking the book back up assuming you read it. None of the rest of us had a gap like that. We remembered the whole climb, start to finish, exactly as it should have felt. Short, easy, unremarkable. Which somehow felt worse, because it meant whatever had happened on that ridge hadn't erased time evenly. It had taken something specific from him and left the rest of us with a memory of normalcy that the actual clock proved was false. That night, none of us slept well, which I think is understandable. Around 11 p.m., I got up to use the bathroom, and I looked back toward the ridge out of some instinct I can't fully explain, the way you check a noise even when you're sure it's nothing. The ridge was there. Obviously, ridges don't move, but it looked closer than it had at dusk. I told myself that was a trick of the dark, the way distances compress and stretch when you can't see the ground between 2 points, when there's no scale to measure against except your own memory of the daylight version. I didn't mention it to the others. I wanted it to be nothing badly enough that I convinced myself it was. The second night, at the next campsite, almost 6 miles further along the trail, in a completely different drainage, with a full mountain range between us and where we'd started, Priya was the one who saw it first. She didn't say anything at first either. She just stood very still at the edge of the firelight, facing a direction that made no geographic sense, and when I asked what she was looking at, she said, "Tell me that's not the same ridge." It was. I don't know how to make that statement sound reasonable, because it isn't reasonable. We had hiked away from it. We had put distance, elevation, and an entire watershed between ourselves and that stretch of grass and wind. And there it was on the horizon, in a position that would have required it to have moved, or for us to have somehow circled back without noticing, which, on a marked trail with a working GPS showing our forward progress the entire time, simply had not happened. It looked exactly the same distance away as it had the first night. Like no matter how far we walked, it was keeping pace. We didn't talk about it much after that. I think each of us needed the other three to be calm more than we needed to say what we were actually thinking, so we all just performed normalcy at each other until it was almost real. We finished the trip. We got off the mountain on schedule. Nothing else happened. Not exactly. No other missing hours. No other conversations Danny couldn't account for. Except Danny hasn't been quite the same since. He still hikes with us. He still laughs at the same things. But every trip we've taken since, at some point in the evening, I catch him checking the horizon, scanning it slowly, the way you check a rearview mirror if you thought you were being followed on the highway. I asked him once, months later, what he thought had actually happened up there. He said he didn't think anything had happened to him on that ridge. He said he thinks something happened instead of him, using the time he wasn't there to use it, and that eventually it's going to want the rest of the conversation back. I looked up the ridge later, back home, trying to find some rational explanation, a magnetic anomaly, a known dead zone for GPS drift, anything with a Wikipedia page and a scientific name I could hold on to. I found a single forum post, for years old, from a user named Ridgewalker_Colton, describing almost the exact same thing on the same range. A short climb that took hours, a friend who came back, not finished, and a warning, at the bottom of the post, that the original poster deleted his account 2 days after writing it. I don't know what that ridge is. I don't know what it took from Danny, or what it's still doing with it. I just know that on our last trip, when we made camp for the night, I looked toward the horizon out of habit before I could stop myself. It was there. It's always there now, if I look. Has anyone else in this comment section lost time somewhere that should have been simple, a hike, a drive, a walk home, and never gotten a real answer for where it went? Our coordinates 4 hours before we called them in. I've been on my county's volunteer search and rescue team for 6 years. Before that, I was an EMT for almost a decade. I'm telling you my background because I want you to understand that I don't scare easily, and I don't say unexplained unless I actually mean there is no explanation. In 6 years, I've pulled people out of ravines, off cliff faces, out of rivers running too fast for the season. I've seen bodies. I've never had a call like this one. Last September, we got dispatched for a 28-year-old hiker, overdue by about 18 hours on a solo trip in a wilderness area east of town. Dense terrain, no cell coverage, one main trail with a handful of unofficial spurs that hikers use as shortcuts and shouldn't. Classic missing hiker profile. Family called it in the morning after he didn't check in the night before. We split into 2 search teams. I was on Team 2, 4 of us, working the eastern drainage while Team 1 covered the main trail corridor. We use handheld radios on a dedicated frequency, plus a base repeater back at the trailhead, standard setup, nothing unusual about the equipment. About 2 hours into the search, my radio caught something on our channel that wasn't one of our team members' voices. It was faint, buried under a layer of static, the kind of transmission you get when someone's keying a mic at the edge of range. But it was clear enough to make out words. A string of numbers. Coordinates. I recognized the format immediately. We use it every shift. I called it into base, asked if Team 1 had a location on the subject. They said no. They hadn't found him yet. Nobody on either team had transmitted those coordinates. I wrote them down anyway, because in this job you write everything down, even things that don't make sense yet, especially those. For hours later, after we'd worked our way further up the drainage, we found the hikers sitting against a rock, dehydrated, disoriented, but alive. When base logged our official GPS location for the rescue point, for the extraction call, I checked it against the numbers I'd written down that morning. They matched. Not close. Exact. I need you to sit with that for a second the way I had to. Someone, or something, transmitted our final rescue coordinates on our emergency channel 4 hours before we had walked to that spot. 4 hours before any of us knew that's where he'd be. 4 hours before those numbers existed as anything except a location on a map that nobody had reason to call out loud. I asked around the team afterward, quietly, not wanting to sound like I was losing it. Nobody else had heard it. Only my radio. I checked the unit later. Standard county-issued handheld, no modifications, no history of picking up phantom transmissions before or since. I've used that exact radio on a dozen calls since, and nothing like it has ever happened again. If you work a job where you're trained to trust your instruments, and one day your instrument tells you something that hasn't happened yet, you understand exactly the kind of quiet that follows. The hiker's name, I'll call him Ethan, not his real name. We don't release identifying details on active or closed cases without consent, was in rough shape, but coherent enough to talk to us on the walkout. He'd been off trail for almost 36 hours by the time we found him, had taken one of those unofficial spurs the day before, gotten turned around, lost the trail entirely in a section of dense timber where GPS reception drops out completely. He told us he'd heard voices the day before we found him. Said he'd heard people calling out, searching, moving through the trees on the far side of a ridge above his position. Close enough that he'd shouted back, tried to signal, even hiked partway toward the sound before losing it again in the terrain. I asked him what time that was. He said late morning, the day before. Team 1 didn't reach that section of the wilderness area until almost 24 hours after that. Nobody had been searching anywhere near that ridge the day he described. Nobody was even dispatched yet. The call hadn't come in. Ethan didn't know that when he told us. He said it plainly, almost with relief, like he was grateful the search had started earlier than he'd assumed. Grateful somebody had been close by that whole time, even if they hadn't reached him yet. I watched my team lead's face when he said it. Nobody corrected him on the mountain. We let him believe help had been close the entire time, because he was dehydrated and scared, and it didn't seem like the moment to tell a man who'd just survived 36 hours alone in the wilderness that the voices he'd heard belonged to a search party that, according to every dispatch log we have, did not yet exist. He thanked us for calling out to him a full day before we knew he was lost. I've thought about this more than any other call in 6 years, and I keep landing on the same two possibilities, neither of which I like. Either two separate impossible things happened to two separate people in the same search, a radio transmission that shouldn't exist, and a set of voices a hiker heard a full day before help arrived, and they happened to line up into the same rescue by pure coincidence. Or they're the same thing. Whatever came through my radio that morning, and whatever Ethan heard on that ridge the day before were reaching toward the same moment from two different directions, like the outcome existed somewhere before the search did, and it was just waiting for the rest of us to catch up to it. I filed an incident report, standard procedure for anything unusual on a call. If you want to look, it's case file SAR 2024-0847 through our county's public dispatch archive. Though I'll tell you now, the official write-up says unidentified radio interference, source unconfirmed, because that's the only phrase that fits in the box on the form. I still carry that radio on every call. I've told myself that's just practicality. It's county property. It works fine. There's no reason to request a new unit over one incident I can't even prove happened the way I remember it. But every time I key the mic now, in that half second before my own voice comes through, I find myself listening for something underneath it, waiting to hear numbers that haven't happened yet. So far, there's only ever been static. I don't know if that means it's over, or if it just means the next call hasn't found its moment yet. If anyone else works search and rescue, EMS, or dispatch and has had a call that never made it into an official report the way it actually happened, I want to hear it. Because I've never told this to anyone outside my team until now. My boots have a crack in the left heel. A small one, maybe half an inch, from a fall I took 2 winters ago on an icy fire road. It leaves a mark in soft dirt that no other boot on the planet makes exactly the same way. That's how I know the footprints weren't mine. I want to say this happened to somebody else, some guy on a forum, some story I read at 2 a.m. and couldn't shake. I wish that were true. It would be easier to sleep. I'm 34. I work in IT support for a regional hospital network. The kind of job where the most dangerous thing that happens to you all week is a server going down at 4:58 on a Friday. I hike on weekends because it's the only time my brain goes quiet. Nothing dramatic. Day trips, marked trails, the kind of hiking where you tell your girlfriend back by 6. and you mean it. Labor Day weekend, I drove up to a trailhead in the Cascades I'd done twice before. 9 miles round trip, maybe 2,000 feet of elevation gain. A lake at the top that looks like something out of a screensaver. I signed the trailhead log at 8:14 a.m. I remember the time because I always check it against my watch, some habit from my dad, who used to say if you don't log in, nobody comes looking. The first 2 miles were normal. Actually better than normal. Quiet, cool. The kind of morning where the light comes through the trees in these long gold bars, and you feel like you have the whole mountain to yourself. I didn't see another hiker until almost the halfway point, when I passed a couple coming down early. We did the nod that hikers do. Nothing else. It was around mile 4, on a long switchback section, that I noticed the tracks. There'd been rain 2 days before, so the trail had these long stretches of soft mud between the rockier parts, and mud holds a boot print better than almost anything. I noticed a print ahead of me because it had the same crack in the heel that mine does. Not similar. The same. Same depth, same angle, same little kick out on the left side where I roll my foot slightly when I planted. I actually laughed. I thought, no way, somebody else out here has the exact same boots and the exact same gait quirk. Small world. I didn't think about it again for almost a mile. If you've ever looked down at a footprint and felt your stomach drop before your brain even told you why, you already know where this is going. Then I saw the print again, and again, always ahead of me, always on my side of the trail, in the exact line I would naturally walk, like whoever made it had been standing exactly where I was about to stand and had just stepped away. I told myself it was the same hiker, somebody with an identical injury, an identical stride, who happened to be about 10 minutes ahead of me on the same trail on the same morning. Statistically improbable, but not impossible. I've fixed enough network issues in my life to know that improbable and impossible are different words for a reason. I picked up my pace to catch up to them. Partly curiosity, partly, and I didn't want to admit this to myself at the time, because something about walking behind those prints was starting to feel less like following someone and more like being led. I never caught up. Around mile 5.5, I stopped to refill my water at a stream crossing. Small thing, but it's the first moment I want you to hold on to. I crouched down, dipped my bottle, and when I stood back up, there was a fresh print in the mud not 4 feet from me. Same crack, same kick out. It hadn't been there 30 seconds earlier. I looked up the trail. Empty. I looked down the trail. Empty. There was no side trail, no bushwhacking route, nowhere a person could have gone in 30 seconds without me hearing branches or footsteps on gravel. The forest was completely silent, in that specific way that only happens at altitude, where even the wind sounds far away. I remember standing there with my water bottle still in my hand, not drinking it, just staring at that print and thinking, that is exactly where my foot would land if I took one more step forward. I hadn't taken the step yet. The print was already there, waiting for my foot like it already knew where I'd put it. I'd like to tell you I turned around right then. I didn't. I want to be honest about that, because I think the honesty is the part that makes this worth telling. I didn't turn around because turning around felt, somehow, like it would be worse. Like whatever was ahead of me on that trail was already behind me too, and moving would just mean choosing which direction to face it. So I kept walking. Faster now, less careful. I stopped looking at the ground and started looking at the tree line instead, at the gaps between trunks, waiting to see something that wasn't a print. I never did. Not once. No movement, no sound, no shape where a shape shouldn't be. Just the prints, always a few strides ahead, always mine. The last mile to the lake, I was almost jogging. When I broke through the tree line into the open basin where the lake sits, I stopped dead, because there, in a patch of exposed dirt at the water's edge, the only spot on that whole shoreline soft enough to hold a print, there were 2 sets. Both mine. One walking toward the water, one walking away from it, back toward the trail I'd just come up. I never went in the water. Here's the thing I keep circling back to, the detail that undoes me more than the prints themselves. When I finally made it back down, and I moved fast, I won't pretend otherwise. I did the last 4 miles in under an hour, which for that elevation loss is not a leisurely pace. The ranger station at the trailhead had a volunteer sitting outside, an older guy in a Forest Service vest, doing the afternoon check on the sign-in lock. I told him I needed to sign out, told him my name, told him the time I'd started. He looked at the clipboard, ran his finger down the page, and said, "You already signed out, bud." Little after 2. It was 2:40. I told him that wasn't possible, that I'd been on the trail the whole time, that I was signing out right now for the first time. He turned the clipboard around and showed me my name, my handwriting. I want to be clear about that, because I've thought about it more than anything else since. My actual handwriting, the way I cross my sevens, the way my signature trails off at the end because I never finished the last letter. Signed out at 2:06 p.m. I signed in at 8:14 that morning. I did not sign out twice. I have never, in my life, signed my name twice in the same day on the same piece of paper. If you've ever found proof that you did something you have zero memory of doing, I need to know in the comments, because I have not been able to explain this to a single person since. The ranger didn't think much of it. Told me people misremember times on the mountain all the time. Altitude and exertion mess with your sense of time. Happens every season. He wasn't wrong to say that. I wanted to believe him more than I've wanted to believe almost anything. But I kept the trail log photo. I took a picture of the page before I left, an instinct I don't fully understand even now. Like some part of me knew I'd need proof later that I wasn't the one making this up. I still have it on my phone. 2 signatures, 6 hours apart, both mine, and I only remember writing one of them. I haven't hiked that trail again. I don't think I will. Not because I'm scared of getting lost, or hurt, or running into a bear. Those are things I know how to plan for. I'm scared of something much simpler and much harder to explain to the people in my life who need me to have a normal answer for why I stopped. I'm scared that whatever was walking that trail ahead of me that day wasn't trying to lead me anywhere. I think it was just finishing the hike I hadn't gotten to yet. And I think, eventually, it's going to run out of trail. I still have the boots. Same crack in the heel. I checked them against the photo of the print at the lake, side by side, more times than I want to admit. They match exactly. I just can't explain how they made a second set. The claw marks on that door went the wrong way. Out, not in. Hook. I want to start by saying I'm not a hiker by nature. I'm 41. I manage a hardware store outside of Missoula, and the only reason I was on that mountain at all was because my brother-in-law talked me into a father-son elk scouting trip that turned into just me, alone, after he had to bail last minute for a work emergency. I went anyway. Told myself I needed the time outside more than I needed the company. I want you to understand that everything I'm about to describe happened to a completely ordinary guy on a completely ordinary trip that went sideways for a completely ordinary reason. Weather. Nothing supernatural about how it started. A storm came in faster than the forecast said it would, temperatures dropped, and I made the call to get off the ridge and find shelter rather than push through it. That's how I ended up at the cabin. It was an old Forest Service structure, the kind you sometimes find on topo maps marked as a historic backcountry cabin, mostly kept up by volunteers or just left to weather on its own. Single room, a wood stove, a desk, 2 bunks. The door was unlocked, which isn't unusual for these. A lot of them operate on an honor system for exactly situations like mine, storm shelter for anyone who needs it, and you're expected to leave it as you found it. I got the stove going, got out of my wet layers, and it was maybe 20 minutes in, once I'd stopped shivering enough to actually look around the room instead of just existing in it, that I noticed the north wall. 3 of the 4 walls had normal features, a window on the east side, the door I'd come in on the south side, another small window on the west. The north wall had a door-shaped section, roughly the same dimensions as the entrance I'd used, boarded over with what looked like newer lumber than the rest of the cabin. Not old boards weathered to match the walls around them. Newer, deliberately placed. I want to be honest about my first reaction. because I think it's important for you to understand how ordinary my thinking was in that moment. I assumed it was structural. Maybe the original doorway had rotted out, or there'd been some kind of damage, and whoever maintained the place had just sealed it up rather than deal with a full repair in a location that hard to access. Boring, practical, exactly the kind of thing that happens to old buildings in the backcountry. Then I saw the claw marks. They ran across the boards in long, deep grooves, 4 and 5 at a time, spaced the way an animal's claws would be spaced. Except animal claw marks, the ones I've seen on trees and on the sides of dumpsters back home, always run from the direction of the animal toward the surface. Dug in, dragged down, made by something clawing at a thing to get through it or past it. These ran the other way, starting shallow near the edges of the boards and digging deeper toward the center, radiating outward from a point, like whatever made them had been standing on the other side of that wall clawing to get out, not something on my side clawing to get in. If you've ever looked at a mark and had your body understand what it meant before your brain caught up, you know exactly the kind of cold I felt standing in that cabin. I told myself it didn't matter. Boarded is boarded. Whatever had made those marks, however long ago, wasn't getting through solid lumber tonight, and the storm outside was worse than anything a sealed-up doorway could represent. I focused on drying my gear, on the fire, on making the next few hours as ordinary as I could force them to be. That's when I found the logbook. It was sitting on the desk under the west window, the kind of composition notebook these cabins usually keep for visitors to log their stay. Date, names, weather conditions, sometimes a note of thanks or a complaint about mice. I flipped through it partly out of boredom, partly because reading other people's ordinary entries felt like a way to make the cabin feel more ordinary too. Most entries were exactly what you'd expect. Names, dates, a line about good hunting or bad weather. But every so often, spaced out unevenly through the pages, in different handwriting each time. Different pens, different decades based on the paper and the ink. The same 6 words appeared, always on their own line, always in the same phrasing. Don't let it count you. I went back through the book more carefully after that, and once I started looking for it, I found the pattern. Same message, different hand, roughly once a year, going back as far as the logbook went. And it went back 41 years, the earliest entry dated to a fall I wasn't even alive for. Some years the handwriting was careful and deliberate, like someone had thought about the words before writing them. Other years it was hurried, pressed hard enough into the page that you could feel the indentation from the back of the sheet. Nobody explained what it meant. No context before it, no follow-up after. Just those 6 words, from at least 40 different people across 40 years, none of whom seemed to know about the others, all writing the same warning in a cabin 2 days from the nearest trailhead. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I kept the stove going, kept the light on, told myself it was just to be safe against the cold if the fire died down. Around what my watch said was 2 a.m., I heard something outside, on the north side of the cabin. Not close to the window, behind the wall itself, behind the boarded section, the exact place those claw marks radiated from. It wasn't scratching. I want to be precise, because I've turned this moment over in my head more than any other part of that night. It was slower than scratching, more deliberate, like something pressing its full weight against the boards from the outside, testing them, the way you'd lean against a door to check if it was locked without actually trying to open it. It happened maybe 4 times over the next hour, each time followed by a stretch of complete silence longer than the last. The kind of silence that feels less like nothing happening and more like something waiting to see if you'll react. I counted 4 presses against that wall before dawn. I have never told anyone the 5th thing I heard, because I still don't have a word for what it was. I left at first light, before I'd even fully assessed whether the storm had cleared enough to safely hike out. I didn't care. I signed the logbook. I want to be honest, I almost didn't. Some part of me thought not participating meant not being part of whatever this was. But in the end, I wrote my own line before I left. underneath the last one from 3 years earlier. I wrote the same 6 words everyone else had written. I don't know why. It felt less like a choice and more like something the room expected of me. The way you'd say "bless you" after a stranger sneezes without ever deciding to. I reported the cabin's condition to the district ranger station on my way out. Mentioned the boarded section and the marks, mostly to have an official reason for cutting my trip short that didn't involve explaining what I actually thought had happened. The ranger I spoke with went quiet for a second longer than felt normal, then said the cabin had been flagged for a structural review for years, but that volunteer maintenance crews kept declining the assignment. He didn't explain why. I didn't ask. I looked up the cabin later, back home, and found almost nothing official about it beyond a basic entry in an old Forest Service recreation guide, and one abandoned forum thread from 9 years ago where someone described almost exactly what I saw. The boarded north wall, the claw marks, the same 6 words in the logbook before the thread ended mid-conversation. The original poster never returning to answer the replies asking if they were okay. I don't hike alone anymore. I know that probably sounds like an overcorrection for one bad night in a storm, and maybe it is. But every so often, usually late at night when the house is quiet, I think about that logbook. 40 years of strangers, none of them the type of people prone to writing something like that for fun, all independently choosing the exact same 6 words. I think about what happens on the years nobody writes it. I think about whether that cabin is still standing, whether someone else is sitting at that desk tonight, deciding whether or not to pick up the pen. I think about the fact that I wrote it too, without ever really deciding to, and I wonder what part of me already understood why. If any of you have ever stayed in a backcountry shelter with a logbook like that, one message, repeated by strangers who never met each other, I need to know what it said, because I don't think this is the only cabin doing this.